Every day, she threw the soiled cloth she used to wipe herself into the sea. But today, something unexpected caught her eye. The feces on the cloth dissolved into the water, and to her surprise, a school of fish swarmed in, frantically feeding on the waste. Overwhelmed, the woman dropped to her knees at the edge of the container, excitedly greeting the fish as if they were old friends. She slapped the steel walls around her with both hands, driven by a wild hope. Starving for days, she was clearly on the edge of madness, desperate to believe these fish might become her next meal. But food wasn't the only thing she needed. Right now, escaping this endless ocean was just as urgent. She and her newborn had been adrift for 30 days. In less than 2 more, the shipping container they were trapped in would sink into the deep. Still, the woman clung to one last wish, to share a proper meal with her baby before death claimed them both. Driven by desperation, she came up with an idea. She tied a sharp screwdriver to a metal pole, crafting a crude but deadly spear. It didn't take long before she had a homemade harpoon in hand, accurate and deadly in theory. She threw it into the sea over and over again. Though she never caught a single fish, the act itself stirred something inside her, a raw, burning desire to live. And failed end up in such a desperate situation. 1 month ago, while still pregnant, the woman committed a monstrous and unforgivable crime. And it wasn't just her. The authorities declared her 12-year-old daughter guilty as well. When the state executed her daughter, the woman made up her mind she had to escape this country, even if it meant risking everything. She joined a group of people attempting to flee illegally, but halfway through the journey, they were intercepted by law enforcement. Inside the shipping container, no one survived the raid. Every person trying to escape was shot dead on the spot, all except her. She acted fast and hid on top of the container before the officers arrived. They never saw her. Soon after, the container was loaded onto a cargo ferry, but someone guilty of such a serious crime couldn't escape so easily. That very night, a sudden and violent storm hit. The ferry shook violently under the pressure of the waves, and many containers were thrown into the sea. Inside one of them, the woman was tossed around like she was caught in an earthquake, slamming against the steel walls again and again until she finally blacked out. When the woman regained consciousness, she peeked through one of the air holes and realized she was drifting alone at sea. Panic set in immediately. Anyone who's ever been locked inside a shipping container knows one thing: it can only be opened from the outside. And right now, the only person who could save her was herself. Her first instinct was to shove her hand into her chest area, searching desperately. She looked up and noticed a backpack hanging above her. If there was a phone in that backpack, she might still have a chance. Sure enough, inside the bag, she found an old-school flip phone. She pulled out the 2 phones, inserted her SIM card into the old flip phone, and dialed the number. To her surprise, the call went through. The phone was ringing. She stared through the hole, watching helplessly as container 107 sank lower and lower, but the call was never answered. She watched in horror as her only family was swallowed by the sea. The grief was unbearable. She could barely breathe, her chest tightening like a vice. But fate didn't even allow her time to mourn. Suddenly, a sharp, stabbing pain shot through her belly. Her unborn child was moving violently again. She curled up, spasming in pain, her body trembling uncontrollably. But then, yet another idea. She realized there might be one way to reunite with her family. With trembling hands, she picked up the Swiss Army knife and gently ran her fingers along its razor-sharp edge. But she didn't use it to cut through the container. Instead, she placed the tip against her wrist and closed her eyes tight, started to drop. Maybe, just maybe, her luck was finally turning. As the water level inside the container slowly receded, the woman began marking it each day. She didn't just track the current water level, she also carefully marked the maximum height the water could reach without drowning her. Since escape wasn't an option for now, she chose to accept her reality. In fact, she began turning this flooded container into her final home. She took out a photo of her family, gently hanging it up to decorate the walls. And just when things seemed hopeless, her luck began to turn. Inside one of the backpacks, she discovered several life-saving tools, a small roll of bread, a can of luncheon meat, and, most importantly, 2 large bottles of drinking water, the essence of survival. But just as she was about to enjoy these blessings, her phone suddenly rang. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be her husband? She rushed to grab the phone, only to find it was from a blocked number. No caller ID. In this world, she had no family or friends left. Who could possibly be calling her now? She didn't have time to think. Maybe, just maybe, this call was her only hope. She answered it, and the voice on the other end sent chills down her spine. It was haunting, almost inhuman, as if echoing from the depths of hell. It terrified her, and yet, it also thrilled her, because it was a voice she knew all too well. It was the voice of her husband. But how? She had seen with her own eyes the 107th container, his container, sinking into the sea, full of desperate cries and dying screams. He was in that very crate. Could it be that deep beneath the ocean, there exists another world? But then came the explanation, and with it, a glimmer of joy. Her husband revealed that he never made it into the 107th container. Only those who paid higher bribes were allowed to board. He had been forced off halfway through. By chance, he escaped death, and now, he was doing everything he could to rescue her. Yet, just as hope returned, her stomach twisted again in agonizing pain. The baby was coming. That night, amidst thunder, and in the chaos, the baby was born. Just like that. No doctors, no help, but this child had endured the worst storms even before its first breath. It was born in the heart of the sea, a child destined for something greater. There's something mysterious about children born in such extreme environments. She didn't know it yet, but this child would become her key to escape. Even the placenta, she didn't discard it. She preserved it in a food container. Any mother would understand, a fresh placenta can save a life in desperate times. The baby's arrival gave her strength she didn't know she had. She looked up once, just once, and an idea struck her like lightning. The backpack didn't only hold food, it also had a fully charged electric drill. Without wasting time, she began drilling at the container's roof, day and night, for 2 whole days. Each drilled hole brought her closer to freedom, but just when she was about to break through, disaster struck again. The drill's battery died. One final corner left to cut, but the steel there was too thick. She stared at the last few inches between her and freedom, so close, yet unreachable. She fell into a deeper despair than ever before. Even with a newborn, even with renewed strength, she was still just a fragile human trapped in a metal coffin. She ate her last bite of bread, her final scoop of luncheon meat, then she took her last sip of water. As she prepared to say goodbye to this wretched fate, her baby let out a tiny cry, and that single sound shook her to her core. Suddenly, she snapped out of it. She quickly saved the last sip of water. She wasn't giving up anymore. Not now. Not with her child in her arms. She would fight this cruel fate to the bitter end. She tried to unlock her phone again, but the shattered screen had already malfunctioned in large areas. She attempted several times, but finally, frustration overwhelmed her, and she exploded in anger. She angrily tossed everything around her. But as fate would have it, this outburst led her to the key to escape the container. She noticed the Swiss Army knife hidden beneath a food container, and to her surprise, inside the knife was a small saw. With renewed determination, she began her long fight for survival. She used the saw to cut through the holes she had drilled earlier with the electric drill, one by one. Though her hands were now covered in blisters and blood, she didn't feel the pain. The overwhelming joy of knowing she was finally close to escaping made the pain seem insignificant. But misfortune always strikes at the worst times. The saw broke, and once again, her chance to escape seemed impossible. And if that wasn't enough, there was the terrifying sound again, the loud, rhythmic growl, echoing in the darkness. It felt as though something unseen was staring at her, and the baby, terrified, cried uncontrollably, gripping her nose. It was a scent of roasted beef kidneys, and it seemed to be coming from somewhere very close, almost as if it were wafting from inside the container. She followed the scent through the water and eventually discovered it came from one of the food containers. When she opened it, she found a fresh placenta inside. Ravenous from hunger, she bit into it without hesitation, but the small amount of nourishment it provided couldn't sustain her for long. Soon, her life began to slip away again. Her strength faded, and she floated in the seawater, drifting into a state of unconsciousness. Not long after, a warm body suddenly pulled her into an embrace. It turned out that her husband had truly come to rescue her. After all the suffering, she was finally saved. But just as quickly, she was doused with cold water and awakened by a shower of icy droplets. Opening her eyes, she saw rainwater dripping into the container, and the appearance of her husband had only been a figment of her imagination. With the rainwater, it felt as if life had returned to her body. She arranged all the containers to start collecting the rainwater. As she prepared to use the rainwater to rinse out the cans, hoping to taste whatever meat was left, she was taken aback by the slightly lifted lid of the can, which suddenly sparked a renewed sense of hope. She gently caressed her child's cheek, whispering that they were about to escape this place. Next, she found a bandage, inserted it into the top of the container, and using all her strength, she banged down hard. Finally, the steel plate of the container peeled away, creating an opening. Thanks to her motherly love, she was able to overcome yet another obstacle, stepping on the once imprisoning container and finally escaping the darkness. However, when she stepped out of the container, the world around her was nothing but the endless sea, leaving her once again in a desperate situation. But there was a glimmer of hope in her heart, an unshakable belief that she could survive. Soon, a plane appeared in the sky above her. Just as she grabbed a shattered screen, a wound on her leg wouldn't stop her. She was like the cockroach that couldn't be killed, always finding a way to survive when it mattered most. However, at this moment, it was unclear if she was delirious from the blood loss, because instead of treating her wound, she began disassembling a television. She took apart the main board, found something like a hook, and then extracted a thin copper wire from an electrical cord. She was planning to use the copper wire as a makeshift suture. Then, she casually grabbed a bottle of strong alcohol. Just when I thought she was going to disinfect her strength. Despite the immense pain, she sutured her own wound. Next, she turned her attention to securing a continuous food supply. She took all the headphones, spending the entire night braiding the wires into a makeshift fishing net. The next day, she tested the net, lowering it into the sea and tossing in a piece of cloth covered in feces. She waited for a long time, but no fish appeared. It seemed the fish had grown tired of the feces allure. After a long period of persistence, her efforts finally paid off. She managed to catch a fish, the first one in weeks. After almost starving for half a month, she finally got to eat the freshest fish. She caught many more and stored them for later. However, the seawater inside with another way to escape the container. Using the containers and some wooden planks, she made a makeshift raft and discovered it floated successfully. She was thrilled and tied her child to the raft. However, she didn't realize that death was already closing in. As she prepared to make a second raft, a seagull appeared and began eating the fish in the container. She watched the seagull fly away, knowing that hope for survival was near. Seeing the seagull meant they were close to land. That night, however, her chances of survival were slim. The previously blocked hole in the container reopened, and seawater poured in rapidly. The water level quickly rose to her shoulders, and her child, now free from the light container, was drifting away. But the woman didn't rush to chase after the child. Instead, she dove back into the container. She had to find that thing, otherwise, even if she survived, she would be a living corpse. Unretrieving a container, she opened it and took out the chocolate bar. With the water nearly filling the entire space, she took a deep breath and dived down to try to cut the rope. However, she had no strength underwater. She surfaced once more, and by the time she came up, the water had completely flooded the container. With only one last breath of air, she dived again. This time, luck was on her side. She managed to cut the rope. And just as the container sank into the ocean, she was freed. But after drifting through the night, the woman was now on the brink of land. Sure enough, her efforts were not in vain. A flock of seagulls began to circle above the raft. At that moment, a fishing boat was out at sea, and the woman aboard the boat noticed the strange behavior of the seagulls in the distance. She immediately urged her husband to sail toward the birds, and that's when they spotted the child on the raft. They quickly rescued the child, and the woman gently touched the child's cheek, but to her seriously on the woman's chest, blowing desperately into her mouth again and again. Miraculously, the woman's sheer determination paid off. The mother finally woke up. It seemed both mother and child were truly saved. The woman hugged her baby tightly, leaning against the side of the boat, unable to believe this was real. It was her child's very existence that gave her the strength to survive. You truly have to admire the ferocity of a mother's love. A woman, for the sake of her child, can become so strong that even a whale would step aside for her. This was an epic lesson in survival. Heroine in this story. If you ever get a chance to watch the original film, I'm sure, just like me, you'll be deeply moved by a particular scene, one that will make you pause and reflect, unable to move on for a long time.